The family winery had been my entire world since childhood. While my friends spent summers at the beach, I spent mine walking through endless rows of grapevines beside my grandfather. He taught me that making great wine required patience, honesty, and respect for every season. Before he passed away, he placed his weathered hand on mine. "One day," he whispered, "this vineyard will be yours. Protect it." I promised I would. My name is Sophia, and after years of studying viticulture and business management, I returned home to run the winery with my parents. At first, everything seemed perfect. My father handled distribution. My mother managed customer relations. I focused on production and expanding our international sales. Within 5 years, the business had doubled in value. People praised us as the perfect family enterprise. Only I knew how often my parents dismissed my ideas until they succeeded. Still, I believed we were a team. Then everything began changing. Important contracts disappeared before I could sign them. Meetings were scheduled without telling me. Bank statements arrived late. Whenever I asked questions, my parents insisted I was overworked. "You've been under too much stress." I started wondering if they were right. One evening, they organized a small celebration after landing a major export deal. Family, employees, and close friends gathered in the tasting room. My father personally handed me a glass of our oldest vintage. "To your grandfather," he smiled. I raised the glass. The wine tasted slightly bitter. I assumed it had simply aged differently. Within 20 minutes, I became unusually dizzy. The room blurred. Voices echoed strangely. The last thing I clearly remember was my mother helping me toward a chair while quietly saying, "Don't worry. We'll take care of everything." When I woke the next morning, I was in my own bed. My head pounded. Several documents sat neatly on my bedside table. According to my parents, I had signed them before going to sleep. I had absolutely no memory of doing so. At first, I blamed exhaustion, until I actually read the paperwork. The documents transferred operational authority of the winery to my parents, while I supposedly took an extended medical leave. My signature appeared on every page. It looked almost identical to mine. Almost. I confronted my parents immediately. My father remained calm. "You signed everything willingly." "I don't remember." "You weren't feeling well." My mother smiled sympathetically. "That's exactly why you needed the break." Something inside me refused to accept their explanation. Instead of arguing further, I quietly hired an independent attorney and requested copies of every corporate record from the previous 6 months. The results were disturbing. Ownership structures had been changing long before that celebration. Several valuable assets had quietly been moved into new companies controlled by my parents. The paperwork I'd supposedly signed completed the final step. The physician couldn't determine what had happened that specific night weeks later, but confirmed my symptoms were consistent with possible intoxication or the effects of certain medications. There wasn't enough evidence to identify a cause. It wasn't proof, but it deepened my concern. Rather than confronting my parents again, I made a different decision. I pretended to accept everything. I apologized for overreacting. I thanked them for managing the business. They believed I'd surrendered. They had no idea. I had already started preparing something they never expected. Months earlier, my grandfather had insisted on one unusual safeguard. The winery's most valuable vineyards, historic trademarks, and aging cellar rights weren't owned directly by the operating company. They were protected inside a separate family trust. Only one trustee could authorize permanent transfers. Me. My parents had forgotten that detail, or assumed I'd eventually sign whatever they placed in front of me. Instead, my attorney quietly documented every financial movement after my so-called leave of absence. Independent auditors reviewed inventory. Digital records preserved every amendment. When my parents attempted to sell part of the protected vineyard to outside investors, the trust automatically rejected the transaction. The investors demanded explanations. Questions spread quickly. Soon regulators and financial investigators began reviewing years of corporate records. My parents looked shocked. They couldn't understand why their plans had suddenly stopped working. During one tense meeting, my father finally asked, "What did you do?" I calmly answered, Exactly what Grandpa taught me. I protected the vineyard. For the first time. Neither of them had another argument. The legal process lasted nearly 18 months. In the end, the court restored management of the winery according to the governing documents and required several disputed transactions to be reversed. The outcome depended on corporate records, trust documents, and financial evidence, not revenge. My parents eventually accepted a settlement and retired from the business. We haven't completely repaired our relationship. Perhaps we never will. Some wounds heal. Others simply become part of your story. Today, the winery continues growing. Not because I won. Because honesty finally returned to the place my grandfather loved most. Every autumn, when harvest begins, I walk through the vineyards before sunrise. The air smells exactly as it did when I was a little girl following Grandpa between the vines. Sometimes I still hear his voice. Protect it. Back then, I thought he meant protecting the grapes. Now I understand. He meant protecting integrity. Businesses can survive financial losses. Families can recover from disagreements. But once trust disappears, everything else becomes fragile. People often ask whether I hate my parents. The answer surprises them. I don't. Hatred would have kept me trapped in the same bitterness that nearly destroyed our family. Instead, I chose boundaries, accountability, and the quiet confidence that truth eventually grows stronger than deception. The trap wasn't built to destroy them. It was built to protect what generations before us had worked their entire lives to create. Sometimes justice isn't loud. Sometimes it ripens slowly, like the finest wine, until the truth is finally impossible to ignore.